Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just one thing before this video starts. This is actually a part 2. I'll leave the link to the part 1 of the story in the description down below. And be sure to stay tuned till the end of the video to catch a sneak peek of a project I've been working on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump back into human nature. Gone. Dimitri's voice was confused. What do you mean, gone? Nukes, Dimitri. The bastards are all using. The signal went dead, its light extinguishing as well as to signify that the man hadn't just stopped mid-sentence. Laura twisted her head back to viewpoint 6 and released a horrible scream that echoed off the capsule walls long after it ended in a tormented moan. It had only been a split second. In that minuscule moment of time that her eyes were open and facing the glass, they were bombarded with a series of simultaneous flashes, so bright it seemed as the earth had, in fact, become the sun itself. The scream was one of physical agony and not all pertaining to the emotional anguish which was far from setting in, even though her brain had realized what was happening. The thoughts of her husband and child being burned away to a pile of nuclear ash, or even worse, living through the blasts, hadn't set in yet. The shock of being so suddenly and completely blinded kept everything else at bay. With quicker thinking than Laura displayed, Dimitri activated the solar shield which blocked very nearly all outside light with the type of tint one could watch a solar eclipse through, and unlatched himself from the seat to set about doing whatever he could to treat her eyes. Although neither of them were doctors, it wasn't as if they were without medical training altogether. Every person that went into space, especially those expecting extended stays, were required to learn just about everything first-year med students were taught. Laura's entire body vibrated with involuntary shaking, a physical reaction to the trauma of having her eyes open and not seeing anything but the assortment of flashing spots over and over again. At the periphery there seemed to be some acuity, but if she shifted her gaze to any area she thought she might have taken in a small bit of Dimitri's movements, it was filled with the disruptive optical echo. In the thousands of times she had been required to spend extended time in the tiny cramped spaces that being an astronaut required, she had never once experienced any claustrophobia, and now, without warning, Laura was overwhelmed with the sensation of being trapped in her own body. Struggling for breath, she was vaguely aware of her co-pilot's voice doing the best it could to calm her histrionics. But it was distant and foreign, the visual barrier somehow reaching into her mind to affect her cognitive abilities. It took several long minutes, and his placing a medicated bandage over her eyes for his words to slowly sift into any recognizable form of communication. Solar retinopathy. No, it's terrifying. Not permanent. He placed one large palm on her forehead with his fingers drifting into her hairline, and something about the warmth and pressure of it eased the hyperventilation and calmed the tremors from her body, much as Dimitri had intended it to. It brought back warm and comforting memories of her father who used to do the same thing when she was a small child. Once we get aboard Olympus, we'll be able to treat it better, and you could be seeing fine in just a few weeks. Laura nodded her head to convey that she not only heard the statement, but also that she was back in the realm of clinical response, and Dimitri seemed to understand its meaning. Good, he continued. Okay, listen. I need you to keep your eyes closed for now and do your best to stay calm. He sighed in a way she didn't think she'd ever heard before, and finally asking, Does it hurt? She nodded. The two small bonfires beneath her eyelids kept her from little more than a responsive state, while the shock momentarily held the rest of reality at bay. She could hear him rummaging through something, airtight foil being removed. while she concentrated on the burning and flashing lights that inundated her optical nerves beneath closed and covered eyes. In a moment, his voice had returned to her side. "I'm going to give you a fentanyl dose." She nodded again, and when he gently slid the plastic tip of the nasal applicator for the synthetic opioid into her right nostril, he said, "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Dimitri squeezed the bottle as Laura inhaled deeply, and the medication began to do its thing almost immediately. Within 30 seconds, she was granted relief with the sweet embrace of darkness offered by unconsciousness. Shortly after that, she found herself in the loving arms of Mike, with Kevin desperately trying to squirm his way from between them. The three of them were in the double king canopied bed that Mike had insisted they spend too much money on, wrestling and tickling each other and reveling in the unabashed and unrestrained joy of being a family in love, and of being all together, which was truly a rare thing. Kevin would pretend to try to get away, but only so much as to reposition himself at an angle to get at her weak spot, between the ribs, just below the armpits. The child was getting stronger every year, but with Mike's assistance, they were able to keep in between them and smothered with kisses. It was a moment that they would have all been happy to have last forever. It didn't. In unison, Mike and Kevin quit laughing and sat upright in the bed, smiles completely erased. Her husband and child each turned to face her, and the expressions of fear etched upon their faces were enough for her to bolt upright as well. Perhaps it was a reaction to Kevin taking her hand or Mike saying, "I love you both so much." But the fear they seemed to be feeling gripped her by the throat as well. Suddenly terrified by the certain knowledge that some impending doom was imminent, all she had time to do was shed a single tear when the bay window flooded the room with blinding and oppressive light. It consumed them, and the smell of burning hair filled her nostrils before the wall of fire came through to wash them away. It was a momentary relief when the psychological sledgehammer of a dream jerked her back to a waking state. But the moment was short-lived. Discovering yet again that she had been blinded, hopefully temporarily, the reality of her situation setting back in was just as horrific as the dream had been. She could hear Dimitri, and he was speaking to someone. "I'm telling you, there's nothing." It was Rukia Kanagi's voice. Dimitri was communicating with the OSS. "We've scanned the entire planet, sir. There are no signals of any type. We've gone over every known man-made frequency in the database. I think... oh dear Lord, I don't even want to say it out loud." Rukia was a communications expert, among other things, and she wasn't exactly known for her emotional outbursts. "It's okay, Kanagi," Dimitri offered, using a voice with the same calming qualities he used on Laura. "You don't have to say it." There were a few minutes of silence, and Laura wondered if she would let them know that she was awake when Rukia's voice filtered through the speakers in her flight suit again. "Sir, given everything that's just happened, I'm uncertain about bringing this up, but..." Her voice became conspiratorial. "I think there might be another problem that you need to know about." "Go ahead, Kanagi," he pressed. "Well," still at a whisper, "it's been nothing more than talk at this point, but, well, I thought you should know. It's Alex and Nick. Jeez, I can't believe I'm even having to say this, but they've been trying to convince the commander that we shouldn't let the Daedalus dock with Olympus." "What the fuck are you talking about, Kanagi?" Laura cringed involuntarily. She had never heard Dimitri cuss before. She could only imagine what Rukia's reaction was. It took a moment for her to respond. "Sir, I can't stress enough that they're simply suggesting it as a hypothetical. I know these people, and I can't imagine that they'd really do it. It's just, well, right now the food supplies are somewhat low. Even with reduced rations, there's really only enough for 4 people to survive for a few months. Everything that we needed to keep a continued supply of food was supposed to be on the Arion 6. All the seeds for crops and enough MREs to last 300 people a decade were on that supply ship. And, well, we've not been able to verify if she got off the ground before the shit hit the fan. Until it clears the Van Allen belts, we're not going to be able to lock on to her signal. And that won't be for another 6 hours. Assuming she's even out there. Rukia went quiet again, and Dmitri considered her words before asking. So what are you saying, Kannagi? Is it that the Ariane never made it liftoff, and they're not going to let the Daedalus board the station? I'm so sorry, sir. Dmitri could tell the young Japanese-American astronaut was sickened by her own words. According to Nick, the current supplies would last 6 people no more than a couple weeks. I don't know what to say, sir, except I will die before I let that happen. You have my word. I have to go before they discover that I've contacted you. Maintain your course, and the second I can, I'll give you an update. Godspeed, sir. Kannagi. Dmitri caught her before she cut the transmission. Yes, sir. Kannagi, Rukia, your father would have been proud of you. Laura could hear the other woman's breath hitch quietly, just short of an actual sob. It was a noise she often made herself when she needed to keep her composure in a haze of emotion. Although it was customary for commanding officers to refer to their crew by their secondary names, Dmitri had been doing it his entire career. It was a rare treat to hear the first name coming from his lips. Thank you, sir. Olympus cut the connection, and after a moment of quiet, Dmitri turned his attention to his bandaged co-pilot. You had nothing to add to the conversation, Hillman. She smiled despite the grave situation. The man never ceased to amaze her. How did you know I was awake? Her voice was dry and cracked, and before she could ask for water, he had positioned the flight suit's drinking tube into her mouth. The water tasted fine, even though she couldn't help but to think about the fact that a portion of it was her own reconstituted urine, much as she did every time she drank. The flight suits were equipped with 10 gallons of water and an advanced filtration system for the astronauts' urine, which would stretch the 10 gallons into the 50 or 60 that they would need to stay hydrated on the trip to Olympus. You're breathing, he answered her question as she drank. Is it true? She asked after finally satiating her thirst. Is it all gone? Dmitri shook his head despite her inability to see it. I don't know. I think it would be unwise for either of us to make any assumptions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that part 2 of this creepypasta. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, along with clicking subscribe and the little bell so you can be notified when the next part of this creepypasta pops up. And now, for the project I've been working on, here's a little clip from Little Spoon Lifestyle.
My life's like a vape pen, just blowing smoke everywhere. Not till today. Today was different.
Hey Cole, have you seen my keys?
When that goofy bastard came walking in, I knew I had a case. A big one too. A real big case.